There is a land of ice and mist, where snow melt trickles down through the mountains and out onto the plains where the giants roam with their herd. The earth there is cold and stony and full of holes, holes that go deep down into black worlds where the only sounds are the drippings of water and the hoarse mutterings of the dead. Skyrim is a wild land. Wolves and bandits and worse roam its woods. The people there resent outsiders. History is everywhere you look, in the abandoned castles and bustling fishing villages. There are treasures to unearth, secrets and ghosts and gods and guilds. And after almost 1,000 years, the dragons have returned. And in the very center of it all, sitting in the back of a rumbling wagon, is you.
Hey, you. Finally awake.
I loved working on Skyrim, but when I think back to those times and what it was actually like to make the game, I think about my team, the artists, the level designers, the programmers, the animators. None of us knew how the game would turn out, but we all knew that it might actually be good if we all just gave it our best.
I felt like everyone was kind of crazy in that sense. It wasn't about like, oh, I got this shit done like in this amount of time. It was like, no, everyone was like trying to get more time, add a little bit more.
It felt limitless. And it was the first time to me that I felt there was any game that really made you feel limitless. And that was magical. That was super magical to me.
Today, in celebration of the 10-year anniversary of the Elder Scrolls V, I am reuniting with 8 friends, 8 former Bethesda developers who, like me, poured years of their lives into this project. It's been so long since I've caught up with them, and I'm very excited to reminisce and share bits of our experience with each other and with you. Welcome to a very special production. I'm so happy you're here, and I cannot wait for you to meet my friends. I want to pause right here and shout out the mod and content creators whose work we leaned on to make this video. You have done beautiful work, and seeing Skyrim through your eyes has been an absolute pleasure. Not only has your wealth of footage made this video possible, your love and dedication keep this game alive. This is a Viking. This is the saga of Eric the Viking. I've had these both for years. I really like Vikings. This was my very first choose your own adventure book. It's called City of Thieves. A few years after getting this, I played my very first role-playing game, Werewolf the Apocalypse. Yeah, no, I know how nerdy that sounds, but I really liked werewolves. And as it turned out, I really liked living out an adventure story that was all about myself. I was at my friend's house one day, playing my nerdy werewolf game, when I looked up and saw something on his shelf. It was a computer game, and the illustration on the front of it looked a lot like this guy, whose name is Zanbar Bone. I reached up and took down the box, and this was my very first contact with a choose-your-own-adventure role-playing computer game. It was my very first contact with the Elder Scrolls. 15 years later, I was a character artist at Bethesda Softworks, and we were beginning work on the next and biggest installment in the Elder Scrolls franchise.
So I was still very much like kind of wide-eyed, like tell me what you need, tell me where we're going.
The concept artist pit was directly across the hall from our office. So I would just kind of go over there and look around in awe, because if you ever see a picture of it, it's just wall to wall with drawings.
The vision for Skyrim felt totally original and yet deeply familiar. It felt to many of us like a story from childhood, only this was better. This was something new, something yet unwritten. So, how does something like this get written? How do you make a game like Skyrim? Well, the great myth of creativity is that good ideas spring up out of nowhere. Eric the Viking, Choose Your Own Adventure books, Dungeons and Dragons. They provided us the roadmap, and Skyrim was merely the next iteration of this.
I think it's important to accept and acknowledge that your best work will not be original. I think, like we are all products of our influences. And so for that reason, I think it's also good to pursue a diversity in your influences.
We had a singular vision to guide us, but it was up to us as a team to collaborate and communicate, to take turns leading and to take turns following. Skyrim was going to be a very large land, and there was going to be room for everyone.
You have to recognize not one person can carry the team. It has to be all of you together, and then figuring out what best serves that game.
So it'd be like, here's your thing, go figure it out. And that can obviously end very, very poorly in a lot of cases. But if you have people that are, driven enough to actually follow through and make something really cool, then you get all those really different parts that are really interesting.
And we didn't even care that this was a thing that was going to be part of a game that was going to make money. It was just like, we wanted to make each other happy, you know, like be proud of like, oh man, I'm involved in this team.
It was never about like what I drew or what I modeled or what I added. It was always about like, what can we give to the player? What can we do collectively to just make this better than it was going to be with each one of our additional steps on there?
Skyrim was made with less than 100 people, right? Like everyone owns a share of that game creatively that if it translated to dollars would make everybody millionaires. Even the worst contributor to Skyrim still made an impression on that game, a measurable impression.
Like it took those people at that time in their lives to make that game.
Yes.
Like you can't duplicate that.
This is the story of a moment in time. None of the people you'll speak to today still work at Bethesda. We've all moved on for one reason or another. Some of us haven't seen each other in 10 years when the question of Skyrim's success was just that, a question. None of us knew how it would turn out, but we had a suspicion, and we had a hope, and we had each other. So, how do you make a game like Skyrim? It starts with a vision, and then it goes from there to programming.
Okay, so say something.
Test 1, 2, 3.
Nope, not there. No. Digital audio. Okay, say something.
1, 2, 3.
What? Oh wait, maybe it's too low.
Test. Hello. Hello.
Okay, wait. Not that. Okay.
Oh. 1, 2, 3. Hey. Hello.
Hey. Hey.
Hey.
Zoom, the global pandemic substitute for real human interaction. It's not the ideal way to reconnect with friends, but at the moment, it's the best we've got. So, as we proceed, I'd ask that you please excuse the pops, the odd pauses, and the occasional camera fumbles.
I have that, no. No.
Anyhow, this is Jean Simonet. Jean is a programmer, and the most important part of a programmer is to lay in the foundations for the rest of the team. Using code, programmers erect the skeleton of the game according to the desired specifications. They build in the essential working systems, the rendering systems, the animation systems, the pathfinding systems, the plumbing, and the electrical. Want the player to pick up items? Programmers make those interactions possible. Want to move from an exterior world to an interior space? Programmers ensure that, as you step through the door from one world into another, you don't suddenly disappear into the yawning void of nothing. Just basic programming stuff.
So I was a programmer on the team and mostly dealt with locomotion, which is not super exciting, but necessary. It's how all the NPCs get from one place of the world to anywhere else. It's funny, it sort of almost became a meme afterwards. The way the characters moved in Skyrim. Some really good, I don't know if they're TikToks or Twitter videos of
they're unbelievable.
Yeah, of
they're
like
unbelievable.
Citizen recruits, you might want to start there. Need something?
It didn't just like slide around in weird ways or tilt their torso incredibly, which is what Oblivion did. We got so many people sitting in chairs, so they're like looking at you over their shoulders.
I
you remember that, right? Yep.
Hello.
Hello. Yep. But it was like a huge, like sort of a step up for us, having much more control over character animation. We did our best to get there, and I think we didn't do too bad. We didn't do, we got the player to feel really, really badass. You would see a piece of concept art and you see these, expansive, mountain ranges and dragons and cities in the distance. And you would see, this really badass character, and you just wanted to make that. Like literally like, okay, I want to make that, like that, just like that, right? Like that's how I want to make it look. And that's how I want to make it feel. Every piece of the world felt interesting,
Definitely. I was just thinking, when I think about how things were laid out, I think about like someone like Joel's work, where the way he like thinks about laying out landscapes. So you see a thing in the distance and you like walk towards it, even though it looks like a straight shot, you have like 7 different adventures on the way there.
Well, Bethesda games in general, to be honest, right? Like it's that kind of defines most of them, which is, you have that one objective where you think you do, but along the way, so much crap happens.
This, of course, is the quintessential Skyrim experience. You see something in the distance, you head for it, and then 10 hours later, you haven't even gotten there because you got distracted. Have you ever played just the main quest of Skyrim? I made the last boss of Skyrim, Alduin, and the Whalebone Bridge that you cross to reach him, but I've never actually seen them in-game. Why? I just never got there. I was too distracted. There is hidden treasure all over Skyrim, but nobody's going to show you the way. You have to find it for yourself.
There's a Harvey Smith, who's the creative director from like Deus Ex and Dishonored. Harvey has this this quote that I'm sure I'll screw up here, but it's like, side content is meaningful because you can miss it, right? Like when you find something that you could have easily missed, it makes the discovery yours. It is not the game saying, I spent time on this, please acknowledge it, right? The player's discovery, the player's sense of authorship of her own experience is more important than our sense of authorship of her experience.
Having that sense that there are actually secrets are a good part of like the feel of that game, because there's other games that swing the opposite of that, where you'll see it in the maps on some games now, where you open it up and it's like, you have found 3 out of 5 secrets. Like, yo, that's not a secret. You told me. I think you need to look up the definition of that word. And for me, that just like ruins it, because then it makes it a collection. Like it just saps that emotion out for me.
The job of a world artist is to model and paint the world. They make the mountains, the sky, the planets, the trees, the very ground upon which you walk. Nate Perkypile is a world artist. He specialized in kits, the basic building blocks of level design, and he made a lot of them. Nate is prolific. There is hardly an inch of Tamriel that he hasn't in some way touched.
The lighting department wasn't even technically a thing, but I did like 95% of the lighting in the game. I mean, you could only play so many lights back then, and it's more empty than some other games, so it's not totally impossible, but yeah, that was definitely a big part of my job, in addition to the world art, which was very kit-centric, so like all the caves and the castles that you see in the game, ice caves, the Ratway, some other random things. I tried to have like the small, tiny cave halls all the way up to those massive ones that they literally put castles in. Because I thought it was good to have that epic scope to stuff, even in a dungeon, because I didn't want it to just be claustrophobic. Because I think that's part of what makes Skyrim cool too, is all that majestic stuff. So I didn't want to lose that on the interiors. So having that capability for the LDs was good. Level designers, for people who don't know what I'm talking about.
The first pass of Blackreach was, I think, just me and Nate. Didn't cross the finish line just that way, but Perky and I basically knew how to build it, and were able to establish it to at least like a first or first and a half pass level of quality.
Blackreach was another one of those projects that we snuck in, and that's more or less a second landscape down in the deep holes, because it's really just a few giant mushrooms and some crazy lights, and just making those really obvious exaggerated things to make it stand out, even though the rest of it is basically dirt and rocks. But they're different enough and unexpected enough that I think that has that impact, and the whole scale of the thing.
For me, it's like, well, we built the whole thing, but now it really does feel kind of like aimless, and like you don't usually see dragons indoors. And so like, what if we build this sort of secret encounter?
From the cave worlds of Blackreach to the icy cobblestones of Windhelm, world artists cover as wide a range of environments as you can imagine.
Honestly, like the part that I like the most, seeing the cities being built. The cities are so cool and they were so unique. It was always super cool to see the development.
While Nate acted as a wide-ranging generalist, others, like Rashad Reddick, a veteran game artist and developer who sat directly across from Nate, preferred on this project to specialize.
When I went to Skyrim, I was like, I want a big chunk of something that I can work on, that I can point to and just be like, that's mine. That was like the intent, was like, I'm going to make the city and then I'm going to do it myself. The initial concept art came from Adam, I believe. And it was just a series of buildings which kind of like captured like the style of architecture in the city, but it wasn't a city. So I had to kind of like go in there and configure everything and kind of like position like the market and the player home and do all that stuff, and the inn and everything. I actually did the inn first as like the first finished building to kind of like set the tone for like how everything else was going to get built. I also did everything outside of the city as well. So I ended up building the docks, I built the bridge, I built the land like right around the bridge. It kind of killed me that we didn't have full like illumination, so I figured out how to fake it, and that's why Skyrim has lit windows. You're welcome.
With folks like Nate and Rashad working on the world itself, it's up to the character artists to create a population for the game. Using most of the same tools as world artists, character artists create creatures, people, armor, clothing, and weapons that populate the game. I was a character artist. I specialized in creatures. I made all the dragons that you see in the base game. I made the Draugr. I made the Jagged Crown. I made the Circlets, the Dragon Priests and the Dragon Priest masks. I made the Trolls. I made the Spriggan. I made the Giants and their Mammoth. I made the Dragon Bone and Dragon Scale armors, the Nightingale Bow, the Sanguine Rose, and the Wabbajack, and Arvak, the Spectral Horse. Now, I've never been described as efficient or technically capable. In fact, in my heart of hearts, and I mean this, I believe that I was the most technically inept developer at Bethesda. I made art, I modeled, and I textured. I was a one-trick pony, and that's all I did. Dennis Mehrunes sat next to me. Dennis also made good art, but he could program, and he could code, and he could work with the editor. He was a many-trick pony. He was my friend and my enemy, but we'll get to that in a minute.
I feel like it was the first kind of game that kind of really to that level of detail and quality. And I'm not talking about the best graphics here or this, because I think it looked good for the time. But I can pick up a pen. I can pull an arrow out of a body and pull in my quiver. I can catch butterflies. Oh, and I can pick flowers. On every level, that game had such depth. And I think that it's not that we did any one thing first or any one thing better. It's that we did it all. You know what I mean? We did it all for the first time. And get down from there. I'm sorry. Get down from there.
It's funny that the cat disrupted the interview at this point because Dennis himself was a bit of a disruptor at Bethesda. Aside from sheer talent, Dennis's defining characteristics are ambition and stubbornness. Dennis never took a day off from this game. He poured himself into Skyrim. He fought battles that I was either too lazy or too technically inept to try myself. He set goals for himself and for the game, and he worked and he worked and he worked at them.
My goal when I got into Bethesda Game Studios is like, I want to try to bring faces up, bring character creation up, make it more modern, better. But I was told, no, we can't do it because it's too late in the process. Well, I'm a knucklehead. So I just kept pushing and doing it on my own and doing proof of concepts until I muscled it in. And then finally, I got the right people to get invested on it. I'm proud of a lot of the work I did there, but I think my favorite contribution to Skyrim was the werewolf. A lot of fans, when I realized that werewolves were actually going to be like the Khajiit, just a human with a head on it, and it was horrible.
That was always absolutely hilarious. That it was going to be people with dog heads and totally normal bodies, and everyone was gonna be all scared of them. Meanwhile, you have some druggy cat guy hanging out the city, and everyone's fine with them.
I love the whole power fantasy thing. So I was like, I want to make this werewolf a big time power fantasy. The fear was that it would break a lot of shit, and it did break some stuff. We wanted this thing to just run like a beast, running. And I remember even the run, they were like, no, you can't do the run, you'll outrun the loader. We had to basically do a trick. Jeremy came up with this trick where he did something with the zoom. He'd pull out the camera, and you'll see it to this day. The camera pulls out in a certain way that makes it look like you're running faster than you actually are. And we pushed the limit on, I think, close to what horse speed as far as the werewolf could run to make you feel like this galloping beast. And when you smashed up, the idea was like, you know what? It doesn't matter if you're fighting a giant. If you backhand the giant with your power move, he goes flying. You know what I mean? Like, the idea is that you're an ultimate power trip with the werewolf. This is stuff we weren't even doing with other creatures. The roar, I remember saying, I was like, no, the roar has to literally make everything go running. And it did. It literally sends everything running away. It was such a power trip that I had designers really not happy with me about it. And I remember the first time we showed it to Todd as a proof of concept, and he was like, this is fucking great. And people were like, but he's like, no, this is going in. We permanently did not have good relationships after that, just to get the werewolf in and be like it was. It was not pleasant. But it was my favorite contribution to the game.
Dennis didn't just cause problems for the design and programming team. As I mentioned, he sat next to me, and we had a bit of a friendly rivalry that slowly took on a life of its own and became the driver for, honestly, some of our best work.
As a new hire, you're kind of low-key on the radar, kind of trying to play out the field. But I remember from the beginning saying, okay, who's the top dog in here about certain things, you know, with the art specifically, especially character art. I zoned in on you very quick. I was like, oh man, Jonah's doing some dope shit. You know, I was like, man, I gotta crush this guy. You know what I mean? Like, you're like, well, okay, my work has to be at least as good as this person, but being how I am, and you know, you can relate because you're the same way. I'm like, no, it can't be as good. It has to be better, you know? But the problem was, over time, I started doing that, and I was like, okay, I know I did this piece, and I'm like, man, this crushes the last thing Jonah did. This crushes it. And then you'd finish your piece, and it was like, oh shit. And then eventually it was like, I go over to your side, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna crush your next work. And you'd be like, now I'm gonna crush your next work. You know, remember, we should talk shit to each other, you know? So at that point, it was just like open combat. It was friendly, but it was straight up open combat. You know, the beautiful thing about that is that, you know, I learned a lot from you. You know, and I like to think we learned a lot from each other. And it's just like, I just remember being like, okay, yeah, it was a friendly rivalry, but you know, I grew so much as an artist as a result of that from everybody, because everybody was talented and grew and did their thing. And it was just like, a lot of people think of the rivalry and are scared of it. And the truth is that the rivalry is absolutely what made me better.
As our rivalry grew, more and more people started to take notice. One of our concept artists, Ray Lederer, was inspired to paint this. It's a picture of Alduin and the werewolf high-fiving. Todd saw the design. He loved it, and he had it made into t-shirts for everyone.
The fact that they're high-fiving shows how that rivalry led to this visual symbol of what a lot of developers did in there, where they brought their A game. You know, and ours was very visual. Other things might not be as visual, but they're there.
We were kind of competitive with each other, but not in terms of like, I want to beat that person. I just want to like make my shit better because that person did such a great job.
Oh, you're doing this? All right, well, I'm going to go back and do that because that's going to make your thing better. Right. Oh, you're doing this? Well, I'm going to go back to my desk and I'm going to like do this thing because I think that's going to like elevate everything.
Rivalries are fun, but collaboration is the name of the game in games. It didn't matter how hard Dennis and I tried to outdo each other. We could not make our own creations move. You need an animator to do that. Animators take our creations and give them life, personality, and motivations. And at Bethesda, unlike in many other studios, the animators took full possession of characters.
Now that I've been in the industry for about like 15 years and worked at a bunch of different studios now, it was really cool to be at a large studio and given ownership of one character, right? Like I handled the rigging, the skinning, and then the implementation, like the state machines and whatnot, you know, and that was like my character. Whereas like at a lot of places, like a lot of larger studios, they tend to piecemeal it even more, you know, and like you only handle smaller sets of animations or you don't get that much ownership. And thinking back on it, I was like, that was really cool. Like that was a really great opportunity that I had no idea I had. I started out doing a lot of quadrupeds. So started out with like the skeever, and then from there worked up to the dog, the wolf, the horse, and then some enemies like Dragon Priest, the Flame Atronach, Spriggan. A lot of other mediums, you can silo yourself a little bit more. And then, you know, you make the art and then you maybe hand it over the fence or down a conveyor belt, what have you. Animation touches so many different departments. Like we interact with design, we interact with programming, we interact with character artists, you know, and I think being able to collaborate and communicate well with those people are so essential to getting something wonderful together.
Leanne Cruz is kind, helpful, wise, and wildly talented. And her contributions to Skyrim include, but are not limited to, the animation of many of Skyrim's four-legged friends.
All the quadrupeds like were way more involved in Skyrim than we had ever done before. I remember spending, you know, many hours with Leanne specifically on the dogs and the wolves and making sure that they look good when they run around. The Skyrim wolves were the first one that sort of like had an actual spine when they turned, right? Like the Oblivion and Fallout dogs were, you know, would be very stiff, and so, you know, when they turned, they would sort of go, you know, very like tanks.
Like I remember working with Jean on that, and it's like, hey, you know, like let's add like these bending animations basically, so they're like, you know, kind of like leaning into the curves and stuff, and just based off of how the pathing is evaluating, it's gonna play those animations. It's always a challenge because quadrupeds are, no pun intended, a beast. You know, there's a lot of like struggle when it came to like AI and like, you know, just whatever systems we had in place for those characters. Like there are so many like weird decisions that those animals were making, and I was like, why are you doing that? Where are you going? Why are you going in a circle all the time? This is going to sound very I don't know, maybe simplistic or something, but I loved working on the dog. The dog was my favorite character. I mean, I guess maybe I'm also a dog person, so that was very biased. Getting the dog animatable and stuff was really fun. And then just doing like the little idols of him panting. I got to work with Yan on it, and I love working with Yan. You know, she was pretty much my work spouse. So I remember just looking at dog pictures with her for like a good like hour or so, just kind of commenting on dogs. It was great.
The collaborative aspects of game design do not just flow in one direction. Remember, it's a vision that guides the team, and the vision usually starts with the concept artists. It is impossible to talk about Skyrim without mentioning Adam Adamowicz. Adam painted 100% of the concept art for Fallout 3, and at least 50% of the art for Skyrim. He helped define the game. His artwork was a beacon that we followed throughout the project, but he never really got to bask in the reception the way the rest of us did, because Adam passed away shortly after Skyrim's release. I could make an entire video all about him, but there were so many other people that I would need to bring in there. People like Ray Lederer, who knew him longer and better than I did. For anyone who wants to learn more about him and his work, you can read my article about him on Kotaku. You can also see all of his Skyrim concept art on Flickr. For the purposes of this video, let's say simply that his work was unparalleled and his contribution to Skyrim was absolutely priceless.
I worked with him a bit on the Flame Atronach because he was the one that did the concepts for it. I remember asking him like, so what do you envision for this Flame Atronach? How do you imagine her moving? And he was saying it was like somewhere across between like a deranged Cirque du Soleil, like trapeze artist, and like a figure skater. And that's what I went with. I was like, okay, so she's skating on the ground, and then I'll have her twirling and kind of being more acrobatic. It really informed how I would animate her. It was great. It was great inspiration.
That's so Adam.
For the most part, the people in this video were part of a newer generation of hires at Bethesda, brought in between Oblivion and the end of Fallout 3. Bethesda was bulking up, looking to add more horsepower to build bigger and better games, and they were looking for hungry young talent to fill that void. That's where we came in. Naturally, we kind of all glommed together and became friends.
I loved our lunches together. Like, you know, like there's always that fear when you started a new job. You're like, oh my gosh, they have a cafeteria. Who am I going to sit with? Like, oh my, you know, like super nervous. But gosh, like I was just so glad to be like hanging out with you guys. It was so fun.
It's much easier to relate to people closer to your age. Oh, no one had kids yet, really. So we're all like going out and having fun. I mean, there's Beer Fest, you know, I was a referee for Beer Fest, and we all kind of vibed together. Being in that kind of similar chapter in life, I should say, it helped a lot.
It was just like, you know, wake up, go to the studio, work on this game that you love, hang out with people that you like, go home, wake up, do it again.
Next to Leanne sat Jang Jun Cha. Jang was hired just a few months after me, and in the 7 years we worked together, we never sat more than 30 feet apart.
Getting the internship for 4 months at the end of Oblivion was like, you know, freaking amazing, like miraculous. And then they were like, yeah, you're done, go home. So I thought I'd never work there. Like one day I just emailed, I believe our HR, Tammy at the time. I was like, look, I noticed you guys have a kitchen, right? So just let me be in that building. I seriously asked to just let me, I'll work in the kitchen or something. I don't know if that made an impression. And I don't know if I can recommend that as well, but to people who are interested in the industry. But yeah, that's how far like the desperation got.
Jang is about as humble as you can be. Unlike myself, he will almost never toot his own horn, so I'm going to do that for him. Our tech at the time, which allowed for unprecedented amounts of freedom, was not exactly streamlined for good animation. Having talented animators like Leanne helped a great deal, while other animators, like Jang, focused their efforts on real-life motion capture. What that means is that if you've played Skyrim, you've probably played as Jang.
Naturally, I ended up just starting out doing the player, you know, the running, the idols, all the combat, the magic, and the paired animations. And
wow, so did you put on the suit?
Yeah, man. In the beginning, we had a really shitty, well, not shitty, very expensive, but in hindsight, very shitty mocap system. It looked insane because it had all these wires that were still tethered. like, you know, like the old Vive, but imagine like on every like part of your limb. There's a strong memory there of me just like going into the basement, right, where the mocap system was, making sure the door was closed, and like just like messing around, just like trying to swing an invisible sword, or I'd find like a piece of plywood and just swing it around and just like record that on my phone. Like I did that over and over and over. Like I think there was a a security camera, so if someone was watching me, they probably thought I lost my damn mind. That was the opportunity for like us animators who weren't used to, you know, using our body as like a tool, right? Some people were still hesitant because they're just like hardcore like hand animators, which is, you know, respectable because that's difficult. But I was just like, I need to get this shit in quick, so I'm gonna go down there and just like flail my arms and do whatever until something sticks, right? So that was sort of my approach, because I'm sure you remember the deadlines were pretty pretty aggressive. So one of those animations that I would say that people don't know about is like a knife kill that was like too brutal. And someone from the team, I'm not going to name who, like basically convinced the managers to like have that taken out because it was like too much. Which is fair enough, whatever, you know. Like I thought I was being like edgy and cool with it.
As it turns out, you can spend years building an entire world and it can all still feel somehow dead. FX artists add rain, flame, and mist, any number of little moving details that help bring the world to life.
I remember this one meeting where I was working on Windhelm for like a while, right? And I was just, you know, steadily chipping away at it, showing, you know, progress, you know, over time. And then Mark added like some like fog and some smoke, and everyone like lost their shit. They were like, "Oh my God, look at it. It looks so amazing." I'm like, what the but I've been working on this fucking thing for like months, and he added like some smoke.
Mark Tier is a first-rate FX artist and the fairy godfather of awesome.
This will be a recurring theme. Like, it would be really stupid if someone spent time on this. I'll do that. Like, that is exactly the kind of thing that makes me laugh. And then I feel like once I'm laughing and enjoying the idea enough, I'm like, I at least need to see it so that I can let it go if it's dumb, or I can show someone else if I'm like, oh no, it is as good as I thought it was. This wasn't really a full critter, but this one just was like my dream to see, was like the little ants. I was like, I can just make a little scrolling texture. It's so small. It's like dumb. It's like dumb to do, which is why I wanted to do it. So I showed the ants in a meeting. This is still like only a couple months into me working there, that Todd was in reviewing stuff. And I was like, anybody else have anything? I was like, well, I made these little ants. And I'm like, where are, oh, on the stump. Yeah, you got to scroll. Yeah, zoom in, zoom closer. There they are. And I'm like, I didn't spend much time. Don't worry, you know, like kind of like trying to cover my ass a little bit. Like, and they're like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, okay. And no one was too excited about it, but they didn't tell me no. But I was like, I know that someone's gonna find these and just be like, the rest of the time, like in the back of their mind, everything underground is centipedes and ants and beetles and whatever, and we never have to show you those again because you had this one unexpected moment that set this tone. It just gave you this glimpse of the rest of the world that you're ignoring, just like we do in our everyday lives. There's bugs crawling everywhere. We're not thinking about them, but when you see one, you're reminded, yeah, they're all over the place. People are looking at everything. You have like a very, very interested and participatory audience. And even if it's a small subset of that group, it's a big group of millions of players, and they'll find your thing that you loved and you put in, and they'll make something of it and enjoy it. So that validated all my little weird ideas, and I'm like, this is just, you know, tickling an itch for me, but I bet you someone else will like this.
My specialty in Skyrim was monsters and creatures, but it always bothered me that there weren't more small living things in the world of Skyrim. The world should feel alive and full of promise. This is kind of how the critter system came about. Now, the word critter might not mean that much to you in the context of Skyrim, but all those little torch bugs and butterflies and little living things that populated the worlds of Skyrim, those all count as critters. They're part of the critter system, a system that was pioneered by some of my friends.
You know, I think you were one of the people who was very early on, like, seeding that idea too, of like, yeah, imagine if there were snails slowly moving on the rock, or imagine, you know, just like this world is fully alive.
The thing that I'm the most well known for is a side project that actually you initiated, like from a conversation that we had. It's literally this: you're like, Jean, why can't we have like small little critters in the world, right? And that's basically, yeah, that was early on, actually, probably even, I don't know, during Oblivion even, or something like that. That's sort of like what set the seed, you know, like later, much later, for me to sort of push for a little critter system. That's literally what we ended up calling it, which were like really low cost little creatures, equipped with, you know, different rules that are not super complicated, so they wouldn't be as expensive as full AIs of NPCs, etc. But that would just add some, you know, some life to the world. The typical example where, you know, little butterflies, they would fly and actually go to different spots that the world art team would tag in the entire world, like, oh, this is a perch, this is a flower, this is a thing, and then we sort of built onto it.
Critters seemed at the time like a totally harmless addition to Skyrim, but this is a Bethesda game, so yes, they almost broke everything, like that one time a bee almost wrecked the beginning of the game.
One day we're in the meeting and it's pulling the cart along. We're like, okay, it's looking good, it's looking good. And the cart stops and it starts doing this, and it's like freaking out, like, oh God, now what? And then it just goes straight up. Like, what now? Come on. So we try it again to see why is this happening? It's fine. It's fine. We try it over and over, it's fine. So someone had to go in and like turn on all the console commands to see what's going on, like see collision and stuff. And it turns out tiny little bee comes by sometimes. And then when it hits the cart, that's what causes it to freak out. So that bee would be on its path and it doesn't get pushed around. So that cart comes, hits this bee that doesn't want to move, but that cart wants to move, and where can it go? Up to space.
Indeed, adding your own flavor to a game is one of the sweetest elements of game design. Like the circlets, for instance. They weren't on the schedule either. I added them, and then Angela, my producer, just kind of made space for them. I modeled the giants to look like my father. Yes, I'm that guy. I didn't want the player to see them as monstrous. I wanted them to look gentle, like oversized shepherds who lived for 200 plus years and slept under the stars. I also signed the dragonbone armor, literally. For anyone who took the time to decipher the dragon language on the armbands, they read Jonah Loeb. I wasn't the only one adding these little touches either. I dare say most of the developers added something of their own.
I put all my features in the game so I could make myself in the game. So I actually drew my eyebrows. That's one of your options. And at the time, the facial hair, all that stuff. So I even had screen capture somewhere of myself, my character in the game. It was the Bretons.
So basically the Bretons are Cubans.
Basically, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
in my mind. And actually the Red Guard female was Liz. I actually took all her features and my wife. And you can make Liz in the game. Yeah, it's cool.
Todd asked me to work on some ideas for the sky menu. He had the basic pitch already laid out. It's in the heavens and the sky, and it's like, you know, these old heroic constellations from the old game, like re-envisioned, and you moving around in 3D space somehow, going in and out of different areas and stuff. So all that framework was handed to me. The background, you know, required this huge, basically like mural, you know, of like this continuous nebula thing. So it ended up being a lot of painting that I had to do, and I had painting the different layers onto these concentric spheres so that when you zoomed in and out, they parallaxed against each other, but when you rotated around from the center, they didn't parallax because you weren't changing the depth of how they related to each other. So I figured all that out and I knew it would work, but then I just had to paint all that stuff, and I kept kind of like looking for an out, like, hey, I want to get any of the concept artists to like do this because I feel like they could do it better than me and I don't want to mess it up. But luckily they kept giving me the opportunity, like, no, just take the time you need, figure it out, get it done. And I'm really glad in the end I went through that and was able to do that, because now I can look back and be like, oh yes, I didn't just innovate the beginning of that and like figure some things out. I actually got to pull it all together.
It is one thing to add content. It is quite another to weave that content into something resembling a game. This is the purview of the design team. They write dialogue, build quests, enumerate inventory items, balance the stats of monsters and weapons and spells. Within the design team are the level designers. They take the physical content made by the world artists, which you can think of as a just bin full of Legos, and they assemble them into a world. They craft dungeons with unfolding narratives, erect villages with dark secrets to be found. They set all the tables in the entire world, just for you. Joel Burgess, whose dog River was model, muse, and lead actor for Fallout 4's Dogmeat, is an exceptional level designer, and he was the very first level designer Bethesda ever had.
I was the first because I saw on like bluesnews.com, Bethesda's hiring level designers. I'm like, I'm a level designer. And like Daggerfall is the most important game I've ever played. So like I went up and I interviewed. And I remember like on the plane, I had printed out everything I could find about all the design team.
That's crazy.
Oh yeah, 100%. Right? Like this is a huge deal to me.
Even after Bethesda hired their first 2 level designers, it was clear that nobody on the team really knew how to use them. So they had to prove themselves and show everybody on the team what exactly a level designer could do.
I'm sitting there, Jeff and I are like undertasked because nobody knows what to do with us. And they're like, Jeff, you want to make a dungeon? And so Jeff and I sat down and we made this dungeon with this story and da-da-da. And the Mehrunes Razor DLC for Oblivion was Jeff and me. Like, as far as like the dev team, that was it. Us and the QA team that brought that thing home. No dialogue, no new code, all existing stuff. And I remember like players getting annoyed because they're like, this DLC costs whatever it cost, $7.99 or $4.99, and like it's under a meg. I'm like, yeah, it's under a meg. It's under a meg because we know how to like use the data. It's not about raw assets. And I think Mehrunes Razor was the thing that was like, oh, if we have level designers who approach player experience creation this way, we can release a DLC that makes, 6 figures in 24 hours for the company. Why don't we do that more? Yeah, I mean, like on Fallout 3, we were the upstarts, right? Like we were all younger. We were sort of seen as these rascals, and so Skyrim was the project that like where we then had to kind of like mature and go from being like, whatever, like stay gold pony boy to like grown-ups.
Sometimes the most lasting impact that you can have on a game can come from an unexpected place. I made dragons and giants and trolls and all these big things, and yet one of the most iconic and lasting elements I ever created in Skyrim was made in less than a week and was inspired by Joel, who just asked me for a favor.
So I knew that Bruce had this idea for these dragon priests. It wouldn't be enough for me to go and make 9 custom Draugr and give them names. It needed some extra like spice. And so I think for 6 months, I would come to your desk once a week and annoy you. I didn't have like the masks necessarily in my mind, certainly not the specific design of the masks. I just knew we needed something. Eventually it clicked with you enough that like you were convinced. And once you were convinced, it made it easier to like put those masks on and like set up magic effects and make them all unique and like get them in the world. Whether or not you had done the mask, I think the dragon priest would have gone into the game. But if you hadn't done the masks, they couldn't have become iconic.
I really liked collaborating on these with Joel. And in the years since Skyrim was released, I have a bit of a problem picking these up on Etsy. I've got a lot. After all the content is complete and the game is made and the bugs have been, mostly ironed out, it's time for one last final step. You have to sell the game, which means that you have to show it to as many people as possible.
Countless trailers, countless ads, countless dev diaries. We worked on all video stuff in-house. Anything video, we were handling.
Dope. By the way, we're gonna have, just so you are aware and comfortable, this whole thing won't be posted. It'll be like pieces of it, so like.
Yeah, no, I know how videos work, Jonah. You don't have to tell me.
Do you know how that? Yeah.
Oh yeah, this thing called like editing. That's weird. No, sorry.
Sal was a video editor. She wrote timelines, collected footage and film, created effects, and the videos that she spliced together became the content that Bethesda shared with the world. And I do mean the world. Skyrim was released in many different countries with many different languages, and Sal had to oversee the production of all of those videos.
I think specifically my specialty in video is game capture and building stories out of games. But my method was always to immerse myself in it first. It was really time consuming, but really fun. I wouldn't even have a plan. I'd be like, I'm gonna run around this area and kill this kind of beast and see what goes on. I just straight up play it for a long time, and I was always surprised at how many people in marketing didn't play the game. And then when I would be interested in something, I'd go and ask sometimes the dev who made it, like, what's up with this? And they'd lead me to something else that's cooler. So I think, immersing yourself in the world, and it's important to get the tone that you want. That's the hard thing, to nail that down, because you could have something that's too serious, you can have something that's too goofy, that's not matching up. Skyrim is just epic and expansive and heroic. So when you're entrusted to show the game that so many people worked hard on, yeah, for me the big thing is it's important to get what the creators of the game wanted across in a cohesive visual narrative. Or I shouldn't roll my eyes when I say it. It sounds cheesy, but you know what? It's true. Strong visual narrative, cohesive vision of the game, and the hardworking people that worked on it.
Why was Skyrim a success? Who's to say? Most of it was you, the fans, because you believed in us and you invested yourself in the game. There was room on the development team for everyone to add in their little touches, and I think that was pivotal because it kept everybody invested in the process and creative and inspired. But the vision comes first, and whether you're building a treehouse or a game or writing a book, you have to be prepared to cut out anything that is not connected to the vision directly. Todd Howard had a saying, "We can do anything, but we can't do everything." To successfully build something big, you have to be prepared to stick to the vision.
Todd knew what he wanted. Seeing a creative director who knew what the game was about and was willing to cut things because it wasn't supporting that vision. I remember for a while the horse wasn't working out. We were having so many troubles with it, trying to ride the horse. The horse sometimes was so fast that the world wouldn't load in time. And I remember there was almost an ultimatum at a meeting where Todd was like, we'll cut the horses if we need to, because what's most important are the dragons, the exploration, and playing how you want. He knew what the game was about. I thought that was really awesome, just to see that sort of high level decision making.
I think one of the things that I've learned over time, and not even just necessarily Skyrim, to know what your idea isn't. So oftentimes you have a great idea, something you want to do, something you want to build. There's a myriad of possibilities of what, the directions you could take it and how it could, sort of grow and get bigger and bigger.
In 2014, a couple of years after I left Bethesda, Jean and I tried to make our own little indie game. We called it Fireborn. We let our dreams and our ambitions lead the way. And as the project swelled in scope, it lost its shape. And as a result, the project swelled into something huge, unmanageable, and we lost our way.
And it's very difficult when you have this idea and it's not put together yet, and you start talking it up and you sort of talk yourself into all the cool things that you could do with it. It's very difficult to say, no, and it's okay that it's not going to be all those things, right? Because you're afraid that maybe it's not going to be good enough unless you do those things. You're afraid, it's just not going to have the impact that you think it's going to have unless you do those things. And it's really hard to not give into that, but it's important because it allows you to move forward. Otherwise you sort of get stuck in, the what ifs and possibilities
well, that's kind of what happened with Fireborn. Basically, it's just we got stuck in the giant.
I wasn't trying to say that.
Hey, listen, yes. We learned some lessons. Yes. We learned some lessons.
Yeah, no, I mean it's it's exactly that, right? It's exactly that. But people don't care about Fireborn. They're furs.
I don't know. It's I think it's the hottest property nobody's ever heard of.
In the years since I left, I moved to New York, got married, wrote a fantasy novel that hasn't gotten published yet, made a couple games that were never released, had a kid, went freelance, traded in my 3D sculpting skills for 2D concept art and illustration. I'm a streamer and an educator, and a YouTuber. It hasn't been the easiest of journeys, but no journey worth making ever is. And if it hadn't been for the last 10 years, I wouldn't be sitting right here where I am right now talking to you. We wouldn't even know each other. And how sad would that be? And yet, every once in a while, I have to pause and stop and look back and remember working on this game with these people, because those memories are precious and irreplaceable.
I had the added benefit of being a developer on it with a team that I loved. A team that was like this, that I'd never experienced that in my life, you know? From Todd all the way down to the kitchen staff. You know, it was just like this synergy with everybody. And to me, when I think of Skyrim and I see something like the werewolves that we got in, and I'm just like, I remember working on that. I remember people's reactions, and I remember being scared to show Todd, and I remember this, and then, you know, I remember all these different individual little experiences that were, I don't know, that just give me comfort. To give me like a, you know, you sit back and you, when you're stressed out, you think about that, and you're just like, oh, that was something special.
Having strong cultural values means much more than the actual game. It becomes like this guiding principle around which you hire. And so when you're bringing all of these different people on, like everyone is already talking the same language because everyone already strongly believes in the core values of the company, right? And so even if this person doesn't know that person, they both know that they believe, you know, at their core, like these principal guiding values, and you can start to have a conversation to build around that, you know. And then when everyone feels like they're in a place where they can be seen and heard, the product takes care of itself.
The journey is really the reward. Being creative is really the reward. Like when you get there, you're just looking for what's next. When you get that first game job, you'll be like, oh, but I want to work on these other type of games that I like better, or that whatever. And then when you get that job, oh, well, maybe I want to have more say and be able to like guide some of the art, because I saw some things we could have done better with how we organize a team or the artistic decisions. So if you forget to enjoy it while you're doing it, then you're missing out on the really fun part.
My final thought on Skyrim is, one, I really miss it. You know, like when I reminisce, is a sort of a warm glow. It was a project that really inspired me and really pushed my creativity and sort of the desire to do better was Skyrim for me. Yeah. And I can only be like forever thankful for that.
And that's it. That's all I've got. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this and listen to our stories. Thank you to my friends who sat down and talked to me. Thanks to the whole rest of the team who I never got a chance to interview for this and who I miss dearly. Thank you to Todd Howard for believing in me way back in 2005. Thank you to my video editor, Will, for putting this all together. He would want me to remind you that if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell. And yes, leave a comment. We have got some unbelievable content coming your way, and I'm really excited to show you. So that's it. Take care. Have a wonderful day.